Okay, so I'm trying something new, but I just kind of wanted to talk um, a little bit about ice and fire, um, because I've been, I'm sorry about, you know, it being a while since I've recorded, um, and I'm coming back, kind of, talking about something completely different. This is ultimately just a preliminary video, kind of taking my channel in a different direction. Um, and just in terms of like what I want to add to the um, different subjects that I'm going to be talking about. I'm still going to be doing stuff about the Bible and stuff, but I kind of want to start making videos about A Song of Ice and Fire, which, for those who are not familiar with it, it's basically it's the book series that Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon is based on. Um, I'm mainly going to be talking about the books, not really the shows, and I'm going to be talking about the lore of the books, which is basically modern mythology, which is a lot of it is taken from older, actual, real world mythology, and how that relates to um, the truths that are spoken of uh, metaphysically and esoterically in the Bible, and basically just like actual like real world metaphysics and esoterica and stuff. And this isn't like an actual like official video and stuff like that. I'm just kind of riffing off the top of my head, just to kind of go over some of the basics of a lot of the different subjects that I'm going to be talking about. And that's basically um, I guess, the lesser known or lesser spoken of uh, deeper mysteries of ice and fire, and how it relates to the metaphysics that are being talked about in like um, Greek metaphysics, as well as stuff that's being embedded in the Bible. And so, like in Ice and Fire, just to put it plainly, there are these sacred trees called the weirwood trees, and the weirwood trees are essentially a portal or a gateway, in which people who have certain psychic senses opened up are able to um, use in such a way as to look into the astral realm or the psychic realm, the heavenly realm, the dream realm, the soul realm, the mind realm, whatever you want to call it. It's ultimately the incorporeal world of consciousness, and it's not just the weirwood trees that are the only gateway into this dimension or this realm, but also the fire, which is what the red priests ultimately, uh, how they enter into this, their consciousness into this dimension, but also the glass candles, um, as well as people who consume shade of the evening, um, the green seers, etc. It's all ultimately talking about the same thing. It's just in nature, no matter which doorway you enter into, it all leads to the same place. And so, the basic point that I've been trying to make, and to convince people that it is the truth. Although I'm tired of trying to speak to people through YouTube comments. I need to get on certain Discords and internet forums and kind of just write articles and stuff like that. But I figured I'd make like a quick video just kind of giving a brief summary of some of the future projects that I'm going to be making videos about. But as of right now, I'm in the middle of moving and at a crossroads in my life. So I've been very busy with that, working a lot and all that. Um, But basically, the weirwood tree, as people who are familiar with the Song of Ice and Fire may already know, is that the weirwood trees are these white wood trees, with trunks and branches and roots that are white as bone, as they are described, with red leaves that look like, bloody fingers scratching at the sky or scratching at the moon, etc. So they're a red leaf or red foliage white trees, right? And the children of the forest, through tradition, have carved faces into the trees. Haven't come to decide upon as to the reason why, but some of the various um, reasons for this is that it's to sort of remind the children of the forest that, they are the old gods, the trees themselves, Mother Nature in general, and that the weirwood trees are sacred, as well as just trees in general. And also to be able to look through the eyes of the weirwoods through pretty much any, time and space, going back to the dream, astral realm, etc. And yeah, the trees themselves, or trees in general, and this is not something that is unique to Ice and Fire. No, this is something that is embedded within the very creation of trees themselves, as dictated and chosen and patterned by God Himself. And that is that the trees are essentially a parallel to magnetic fields. If you look at the geometry and the shape and the form that a tree takes, their central trunk is the axis mundi, or the pole of the magnet, and the bough is the expanding outward upper pole, and then the roots are the expanding out lower part of the magnetic field. And what was my point? This would be like the hourglass shape, or the hyperbola, etc. So that is why the tree is such a sacred symbol, is because it's telling us about the very fundamental geometry of all creation. Because I want to clarify also, my knowledge scientifically in terms of magnetic fields is rather scarce, because it's not really one of my specialties, but pretty much most of what I know comes from Ken Wheeler. I know, because the magnetic field is not merely something that is understood and learned about and researched in the realm of science. It is a spiritual thing, equally, and it is something that is known throughout mythology, and it's more so qualitative, in nature. So it has a sort of poetic aspect to it, and it relates to our own form of spirituality, and our own understanding of our soul. So that's where I'm coming from, and I'm trying to let people know that whether or like, I don't understand completely how George R.R. Martin came to understand this, but what I know for certain is that he is aware of this, and he's purposefully putting a lot of these various symbols within his modern mythology of A Song of Ice and Fire, which we should take a little bit more seriously than, most other modern texts and stuff like that. For me, I often lend credence to older things, of more advanced, ancient, wise civilizations. But because Ice and Fire is, for the most part, I'd say like 90 to 95% based upon real world mythology from across the world over, it is basically an amalgamation of all those various different cultures as myths and legends and folk tales and philosophies and metaphysics and this and that. So that's why we should take it seriously. But So when we talk about, for instance, the Song of Ice and Fire, right? Fire, symbolically going back in time, is often related to the color red, and ice or water, they're often, paired up together, is symbolic with the color blue. So this dichotomy of red and blue is a parallel, um, or an expression of the Song of Ice and Fire. And the thing about a magnetic field is, as shown by Ken Wheeler, if you look at the magnetic field under the ferrocell, you'll see how he points out how both ends of the magnet are actually, the north end is red and the south end is blue, right? The blue southern end is slightly bigger than the red northern end. But uh, these are not just names randomly given to them to, distinguish them and to separate them, but it's because the actual ends, if you look at them closely, you'll see that the southern end has a bluish hue to it and the northern end has a reddish hue. And so that is one of the deeper meanings as to the Song of Ice and Fire. The Song of Ice and Fire is nothing more than this dance, or this song of the polarities and the dualities of life, and how they're constant, like all of creation is made up of this song, because, the ice and fire, or the blue and the red in this case, parallels black and white. And that's the yin yang, that's exactly what the symbol of yin yang is talking about. And it imparts a very important lesson because it tells us about how life is created through these patterns, which is given to us by, the patronos, which is the father, right? That's where the word pattern comes from. It comes from the old word paternos, which means father, right? This is related to the name of Peter, for instance, which is also related to the word rock, as well as head, right? And all of that is not by accident. When the more fluent you become in understanding symbols, the themes of mythology, archetypes, as well as etymology, the mysteries that are contained within words, and these patterns and stuff like that, you'll realize exactly what it is that I'm talking about, right? And I actually, I lend a lot of credit not only to Ken Wheeler for showing not only me, but pretty much anybody who was willing to listen about the magnetic field, or the conjugate reality of the magnetic with the dielectric, which, they're basically the same thing. They're just two modalities of the same thing. And this, but I also want to lend credit to David Lightbringer on YouTube, as well as Marty Leeds, as always, because by understanding each of the different things that they put their time and effort into understanding, and me taking the time to actually start to compare and understand how they're connected, this is how I've been able to come to understand this. And my point being is that when you start to understand what it is all these things mean and how they correlate with one another, you start to understand not only the fabric of how reality is formed, right, the very essence of reality, but you also kind of can get a more clear understanding of God's will and understand the reasons why he does the things that he does. And it just, in general, makes life easier through its ebb and flow, which the ebb and flow is the Song of Ice and Fire, right? It's the polar shifting of reality, right? Or also to more clearly understand, the darkness that's in the light and the light that's in the darkness, and how these patterns are constantly interwoven to create the complexities of life, right? Because, one thing that I want to clarify, that's as described by Ken Wheeler, and again, I just want to let you know I'm coming at it from a more philosophical emotional place, just because of my own um, predisposition and way of understanding things. But magnetism is not necessarily, just the field in which causes, uh, the magnetic metals to be drawn to one another, if you want to call it that. But a magnetic field or magnetism is, in its most basic understanding, is its reality. Its actuality. It is existence as manifest as we see it, right? Which all comes from its dielectric center or its dielectric core, which is the place where the energy is, prior to the actuality or creation, which as it stores up and it can no longer store, it is lost, and by that very discharge, it then releases that charge, and then that is how the dielectric, basically changes modalities or has that polarity shift, which then becomes magnetism. Excuse me. Um, and as the magnetism mirrors that and it fully releases its energy, it naturally goes back to the plane of inertia and then to the dielectric center, which then creates the pattern all over again. And so that right there, fundamentally speaking, is why life goes through these ups and downs, these ebbs and flows, right? These good times, bad times, and stuff. It's all the same pattern, and it's repeating itself in various different ways, which from the outside looks confusing, it looks chaotic, but in reality, it's all based upon a very intelligent and wise pattern. And the reason why I'm making this video and trying to point people to this is to understand not only how these things form, but why, and to better understand our lives. But so yeah, the Song of Ice and Fire, parallel to that, is the red and the blue of the poles of the magnet. And this in Ice and Fire is, one of the primary examples of how this manifests, as how, oftentimes we consider light to be a good thing and darkness to be a bad thing. But, again, going back to how things, polar shift, etc., light or fire in some cases is generally a good thing. Light is the expression of the potential which comes prior to light, which is understood as darkness because the dielectric center is a black hole. But then, when the light dies, it goes back to the darkness, and then when the darkness, again, stores up that charge and then releases it, light returns. This is the whole symbolism of the phoenix, which, the weirwood trees, as, not only described by George R. Martin, but, further explored by David Lightbringer, the weirwood trees and Ice and Fire are based upon the ash tree, and Yggdrasil, which is, part of the Norse cosmology, etc., the world tree, or the axis mundi, which is the pole of the whole magnetic field of the Earth, right? It's the giant magnetic field in which we all exist, and all the smaller magnetic fields are inside of, right? It's like those Russian dolls, you have one tiny doll encapsulated in a larger one inside of a larger one inside of a larger one, and so on and so forth. These are the angels. These are these, the wandering stars, etc., etc. The wheels, Ezekiel's wheels in Ezekiel 10, etc. But the ash tree, it's like, why the ash tree is called an ash tree, aside from the fact that, it is symbolically the burning tree, right? Or the tree that is burning or is on fire, or why the weirwood leaves are red to symbolize burning leaves, etc., is because, again, it is a parallel to life, like the tree represents life, that's magnetism. Fire and light, the sun, etc., is symbolic of, um, a magnetic field burning itself out, etc., returning to the dielectric and then being reborn. So ashes, for instance, are the result of after the fire's burned out, right? And so, for instance, we go back to the mythology of the phoenix, right? The phoenix is a fiery bird, right? Which, when it gets to the end of its life cycle, it burns itself out, turns into a pile of ash, and then it is reborn, right? And so again, the phoenix, the ash tree, Yggdrasil, the burning tree, um, the weirwood trees, all that is again talking about this cycle of life, death, or birth, life, death, and rebirth. You know, you can go back to Ice and Fire. The people who tend to, or are the guardians, or the sort of patron deities of the weirwood trees, are known as the Green Men, and that's based on real world mythology. The Green Man, or Cernunnos, um, this wooded, like stag man type creature, who, or the, I actually recently learned that for instance, a ghillie suit, right, which is like used in the military with like a bunch of fake leaves so as to allow a soldier to blend in with the trees in a forest, etc., is actually based upon the ghillie dhu, which is like a male fairy of, I may be mistaken as to what culture. It's either Scottish or Irish, but there's a male fairy spirit called the ghillie dhu, which is, clothed in leaves, right? And that's where the ghillie suit comes from, the name for it. And there's actually a character in Ice and Fire, a female named Gilly, who, if I'm not mistaken, has pretty much like weirwood tree symbolism attributed to her. And that usually goes back to the children of the forest, or the green men, the stag man. I don't want to go too deep into this, but I'll be brief. The stag, for instance, is symbolic of the trees, through the shape of their antlers, right? Which looks like a dead tree. Again, not only just a tree, but a dying tree, burning tree, or the tree in winter, right? And typically, stags are symbolically or mythologically described as guardians of the forests, etc., just like the green men. This is why the stag man or the green man, or why, for instance, Cernunnos is described as a man with the antlers of a stag, because again, it's a symbol of the trees, right? Um, there was another point that I was going to bring up just now. Um, Oh yeah, I recently learned that another name for a stag, a grown male deer, is known as a hart, Hart, which phonetically is identical to the normal word heart that we know, Heart. And that's very interesting because in Ice and Fire, for instance, uh, within the castles of the north, as well as some of the castles in the south, they have what is known as their God's Wood, right? Which is all built around a weirwood tree, or sometimes an oak tree if they had chopped down their weirwood trees. I don't want to get into that, but basically, that particular tree that's in their God's Wood inside their castle is what is known as a heart tree, right? Again, another connection connecting the stag back to the tree, right? Um, what was my next point? But yeah, it's in the center of the garden, right? Again, this goes back to the Garden of Eden and the two trees, right? In the Garden of Eden, which the fact that there are two trees, again, is to tell us about the fact that the tree, the world tree, has two dualistic aspects of the poles, right? But the garden, when you read in, for instance, mythology or symbolism, or when something is being encoded in that way, when you read, for instance, the word garden, field, the wilderness, for instance, or the sea, or the ocean, a lake, an island. When you read these words, you have to always understand that what they're talking about is that field, that magnetic field. This is why in the Bible, for instance, the sky, or whether it be daytime or nighttime, is known as the waters above, right? You have the waters above and you have the waters below. And that right there is it's a magnetic field symbol, right? It's talking about the gigantic magnetic field in which we all live, which is made up of the ether, right? Um, and what's fascinating is, for instance, when you're on a ship out in the middle of the ocean, and if you look at the horizon, where the sky meets the sea, right? It looks like a perfect mirror that's like sliced right in half by the horizon line. What's fascinating about this is that the wizard in Arthurian legend is known as Merlin, which not only goes back to the word Merling, which is another name for a mermaid or a merman, I guess, in this sense. But if you break down the etymology of the name Merlin, mer goes back to water, like mermaid, merling, etc. Marina, um, uh, marine, maritime, etc. It goes back to water, right? And Lin, etymologically, is talking about a line. So when you think of the name of Merlin, what it's telling you is Merlin. It's talking about the water line. Again, the horizon, which splits the waters below and the waters above, right? And so that's what it's telling you. It's talking about that reflective nature. And so the entirety of the magnetic field is symbolically known as and ice and fire as the green sea, right? It is a sea made of water, but it's green like trees, right? It's green like foliage. And this is something else that I don't want to go too deeply into right now, but I'll just go ahead and, mention it in brief. But in lots of ways, in a bottomless number of ways, the trees and the earth, right, the plants, is most often, a parallel to water, right? Rivers, lakes, oceans, you name it, right? The waters above, which would be the sky as well. So this is why all these different words are parallels to each other, because they're ultimately talking about the same thing, and that is the ether, that is the magnetic field, that is going back to the astral realm. That's why it's called the green sea. Um, but what was the next thing that I wanted to mention? Yeah, Merlin, for instance, is the Odin figure, or Odin, or Wotan, right? You can think of like Gandalf, for instance, in The Lord of the Rings, right? He's an old man, pointed hat with a wide brim, big bushy eyebrows. He's got the long gray beard. He's known as the Gray Beard, the Gray Wanderer, Mithrandir, etc. But Merlin is the Odin figure, which is Mercury, right? So Mercury, again, Mercury, being its prefix is Mer, again, going back to Merlin, right? But when you look at the metal of Mercury, it's very reflective, like a mirror, right? Mirmer, mirror, right? See? It is the mirror, right? Because again, when you look at the water line along the horizon when you're out on the sea, it makes like a mirror. It's reflective, right? Again, This is talking about this dualistic nature of yin yang, the poles of the magnet, the Song of Ice and Fire. Um, uh, when a character known as Blood Raven in A Song of Ice and Fire describes the weirwood trees, right? He describes it as a like a river of time in that sense, right? Or men are trapped within the river of time, always moving in one direction from the past to the present to the future. But trees themselves are not moved by that river, right? They're like firmly planted in one spot, and they are born, they grow, they live, and they die in that one spot, and they're not moved by that river. The fact that Blood Raven, right, whose real name, because he is a bastard, he's of the Riverlands, if I'm not mistaken. That's why his last name is Rivers. His real name is Brendan Rivers, which, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering this correctly, the name Brendan etymologically goes back to rivers. So my point being here is that rivers are a parallel to this astral realm. But, in fundamental terms, water in and of itself is a ether perturbation field of magnetism, etc. In general, water in general, but rivers are a very good symbol for that because of the way that it flows and the way that it moves, right? Rivers more so are talking about the lines of constructive and destructive interference within the magnetic field, right? The way that the energy flows throughout the magnet as it, charges up in the magnetic field, and how it discharges and returns back to the plane of inertia and then the dielectric center. But that's the way that the consciousness moves through this field, right? Um, The one of the main rivers, for instance, in A Song of Ice and Fire is known as the Trident, right? And when you think of a trident, for instance, it harkens back to Poseidon and his three-pronged fork, right, staff thing. Tri means three, right? So trident, right? It's talking about the number three. And the reason being is because the river forks into three separate smaller rivers. It forks, just like how a trident is like a big fork, You talk about a fork in a road. Into three smaller rivers known as the Red Fork, the Green Fork, and the Blue Fork, right? And the Red Fork being because of the red soil that's stirred up by the flow of the river, which gives the water a more reddish hue. The Green Fork being because of its green waters filled with like algae and stuff like that. It's like around a lot of like reeds and foliage near the water. And the Blue Fork because it has these crystal blue waters, right? And again, this is another way to symbolically depict not only the red and the blue ends of the magnet, the northern and the southern, respectively, but also the point where they meet and the center, which is the green, right? And these are actually the three different primary, forms of magic that are used in the myth of the Song of Ice and Fire. You have fire magic, which is not only used by the fire priests and priestesses of the worship of Rolor, but also the dragons and the dragon riders, right? But you also have the green magic, which is associated with the trees, the green seers, and the weirwoods and this and that. But also blue being representative of a more, subtle form of magic that's used in the story, which would be the water magic used, for instance, by the Roinar. But it could also be related to ice magic that, supposedly that's associated with the others, the White Walkers, the building of the wall, the North, etc. But the watery aspect may also be related to the deep ones and those people of that ilk, Um, but again, this is just another way to explain the a song of ice and fire, this dichotomy of red and blue, which, permeates our world like entirely, right? People say like roses are red, violets are blue. You look on a police car, right? You got red and blue lights that are flashing, which note the name police, right? Police, right? It's pole, again, going back to this pole, right? Which is polarity, because all of this is about polarity shifting, right? One thing going to its opposite, then it going back to, etc. And police, which would be ICE. It's talking about ice, right? So they're telling you about the pole, and then they're telling you about one of the duality, or one side of the duality, the ice, right? It's talking about the cold nature of the pole rather than the fiery. So it's like police is telling you about the icy blue end of the pole. Think about that, right? Especially with the red and blue lights that flash upon the tops of their cars, etc. When you look at a sink, you see the red for hot, blue for cold. Uh, Blue is for boys, and pink, which is a lighter shade of red for girls, etc. In fact, the color pink is very important when it comes to understanding um, the dualistic nature of the weirwood trees, for instance. The weirwood being white wood and red leaves, right? That goes back to menstrual blood and semen, the two fluids which come from the two genders, right? And when you take red and pink, or not red and pink, when you take red and white and mix them together, you get pink. This is why pink is associated with love, because it represents the alchemical marriage of the red of the menstrual blood of the female and the white of the semen of the male. Um, but yeah, like the I guess the last thing that I kind of want to mention is I just, because I don't want this video to be too long, but I just kind of want to bring up something that David Lightbringer had gone over, because there's so much to get into, and I do not have my thoughts organized. I've just been very busy, and I just wanted to take an opportunity to be able to like make a quick video and just kind of get these thoughts, express these thoughts in general. But I find that I need more time, and I want to kind of put together some presentations and stuff like that. But the last thing I'll mention is this. They're called weirwoods, right? And the reason being is not only is it's a nod to George's, kind of paying homage to one of his favorite artists from a band called the Grateful Dead. I think his name is Bob Weir. I think he may be the vocalist of the band. But yeah, he was, kind of tipping his hat to Bob Weir by putting that in there. But it also had a very practical reason as well. And that is because a weir is a sort of, and I give credit to David Lightbringer for finding this out and bringing this to our attention. But a weir is like a sort of like fishing net that's connected from one bank of a river to the other side, which is used to, if I'm not mistaken, it's mainly used to catch fish, right, or filter out certain types of fish from being able to get to the other side of the river. But I think it also has other practical uses. The first part I know for sure, but I think I could be wrong about this, but I think it's also used to like be able to like manipulate how much water gets through and stuff like that. I'm not sure, but it's a net, in other words, which goes from one end of a river to the other bank, right? And for instance, a net is symbolic of this magnetic field, right? Because when you look at the torus, which is the geometry of the magnetic field, it looks like a dream catcher, exactly identically like the dream catcher, which is like a woven net, right? In fact, when you look at like a fish catching net, oftentimes the way that they're fashioned and strung together is like a magnetic field. So that's what he's making reference to, right? The fact that the tree is like a net of soul energy, right? Or consciousness. And the world tree, for instance, that contains the entirety of our planet or the cosmos, as far as we know, is like a giant net, and we're all caught in it, right? Our souls are caught in it, right? Our bodies are caught in it, like we are fish in a weir, or a fish in a net, right? But another name for the that fishing weir is called a garth, and the main deity in A Song of Ice and Fire that is associated with the weirwood trees is George's rendition of the Green Man, which I lend a little bit more belief to it being something that may actually have been something in reality that we have forgotten. But his name is Garth Greenhand, and it's well known that he is depicted as a god. He's, but oftentimes, certain people will believe that he was just a man and this and that. And there were plenty of men that were of his lineage that were named after him, part of his line of children. But Garth, right? That's his name, Garth Greenhand. And he's basically a stag man. He's a green man. He's symbolic of the trees, he's like Johnny Appleseed going around planting seeds. And he was god of nature and fertility, this and that, music, very gregarious, jovial and whatnot. But a garth, a fishing garth, is another name for a fishing weir. So there's another connection. But another meaning of the word garth is a garden. It's like when you look at old courtyards and stuff like that. If I'm not mistaken, they're usually inside temples or churches, but they don't necessarily have to be, if I'm correct. It's a courtyard that's centered around a central garden, or oftentimes a central tree. And this is in the real world. They're called cloister gardens, right? Cloister meaning an enclosed space or an enclosed place, right? And oftentimes they would put a tree. That is the real world equivalent of a godswood. Because if you think about it, that is a garth, right? And garth means weir, and the trees in the godswood are called the weirwood, then that means that it is a garthwood, right? And garth is depicted as a god, so godswood, garthwood, weirwood, etc. It's making it when they made those cloisters back in the day, right, of a four-cornered courtyard, right? It's no mistake that it's called a court yard, because court or quart is talking about a quarter. It's talking about four corners, right? And I don't want to get into the etymology of court or corn or court and all that, but again, it's talking about the four corners of the earth all being encapsulating this giant magnetic field, which is the godswood, the garthwood, the weirwood, the heart tree in the center, right? And again, a heart is a male deer, and upon his head are the antlers, which look like a tree. On top of the heart's head, which the heart of the cloister garden or the garth garden is the tree. So you see what I'm saying? Parallels that can be I always get glean and gleam mixed up, but that can be understood through the observation of these symbols and these motifs and these myths and these legends, and the metaphysics contained therein are based upon such real mysteries that it's helping to clarify the very fabric of the reality in which we live. And it's deeply, deeply in alignment with the mysteries that are contained within the Bible. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to go over this with the magnetic field and stuff, because I think it's something that people who are studying ice and fire or mythology in general, or who are just trying to find another big clue and key to understanding these things. Again, like I said, I have so many things to go over, and my thoughts are not organized at all. I don't have any notes. I'm just kind of riffing, but I plan to, when I get more free time after I move and get in a better position, hopefully work a little bit less hours. I'll have more time to be able to make proper videos and this and that. So forgive me for it just being a recording of me speaking and, overlaid a bunch of pictures. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, I don't want to go on too long, but yeah, I'll see you later.